Today's daf is daf Dalid, and we'll begin where we left off with line 4, Ein Monim Tachshitin, in Akal Kol Shloshim Yom. So let's just review. The case was that everything was ready, everything was prepared for the wedding, and the pito, the breads were baked, and the meat was slaughtered. They didn't have preservation like we have today with freezers and so forth and so on. And then one of the following two parents died, either the mother of the kala or the father of the chassan. And we have a problem now, because if we bury the dead, then we have to start Shivas Yimei Avelus, and we cannot have the marriage ceremony and begin the Shivas Yimei Mishteh until after the 7 days. In the meantime, all the food's going to spoil. And since the mother of the kala is in charge of Tachshitin, we're in a problem. And if the father of the chassan, who's together with the chassan responsible for the suda, we have a problem. So the solution to the problem is that we bring the mess into a room in a private place, and then we could rush the chassan kala into the chuppah, and then we begin the Shivas Yimei HaMishteh. And then after the Shivas Yimei HaMishteh, only then will the Avelos be chal, even though immediately after the Ilas Mitzvah, they'll bury the dead, and then the days of Avelos are ready to be chal, but now the days of Avelos will have to be postponed until after the Shivas Yimei HaMishteh. That's not a problem. And during this period of time of Avelus, which means, again, we have the 7 days of Mishteh, now we have the 7 days of Avelus. During that Avelus period, we're going to allow the Kala a special compensation, a special heter, a leniency of Tachshitin, of all sorts of types of cosmetics, which normally are prohibited during Avelus. We're going to allow that, and to spend that Easter of Avelus for the first 30 days, the Shloshim. And this is Kadesh Lo Tizgan Al Bailot. She has a new husband, and we want it to look beautiful for her new husband. Now the Gemara wants to analyze and explain the Brisa. V'dafka Aviv Shel Chasan O Imel Shel Kala. This whole kula that we postpone the burial until after the wedding is only in those cases where Aviv Shel Chasan died or Imel Shel Kala died, the Leka Inish L'Tarach Lahu, because there's no possibility of replacing the Tachshitin if the Imel Shel Kala is gone, and there's no possibility of recreating the Suda because the Suda is going to be gone, and we need the father of the Chassan who's going to be Toreach for the Suda. Aval Ibcha. In the reverse case, let's say the mother of the Chassan died or the father of the Kala died. No, we're not going to be matir to be makdim the chuppah before the burial. The burial has to take place immediately. Amar Rafram Bar Papa Amar Rav Chizda Lo Shanu. When did the law of the Brisa allowing you to be magdim the nesuin before the kfur apply in order to save the basar? El shenosan mayim ala basar. It wasn't just raw meat in that state, but rather they used to pour the water over the meat, and that creates a physical process that speeds up the sirachon of the meat, the kilkul abasar. Avalo nasan mayim al gabi basar. If the meat is fresh, and it could be preserved for some period of time if the water wasn't added, then misdaven, we can sell the meat in the butchery, and there's no great loss of mammon. And therefore, we're going to begin Shivas Yimei Avelus with Kvura, followed by the marriage after the Avelus. We're not going to be matir to be makdim the nesu into the Kvura unless there's an element, says Rafram, of Hefsed Mammon, which is a reality once they pour the water over the meat. Amar Rava, ubikrach, In a large urban center, you'll always find people to buy the basar. So as soon as you put it on the market, it'll be sold immediately. We don't have to worry about a delay during which time the meat would spoil. And therefore, let's sell the meat immediately after the shechita, before it gets ruined, it's spoiled, and we don't have any problem finding a buyer for it. But in a small village where the population is very minimal, and therefore the buyers are limited in number, you won't be able to find a buyer even for the raw meat without having been watered before it starts spoiling. So we have a very urgent situation of hefsed mammon to prevent the kilkul, and therefore we're going to set up Shivas Yimei Mishnah before the Shivas Yimei Avelus. The Gemara asks V'ela, Rav Chizda Eichem Mishkachas Lo. You've now broken it down to two possibilities, to either a city or a village. In the case of a village, we established that even if he put the water on it, it's still going to be kilkum. In the case of a village, in the case of a city, even if he put the water on, it's not going to be spoiled. He'll find a buyer. So when do we justify the distinction that Rafram, in the name of Papa, made between whether they already put the water on or they didn't water the meat? Omar Rav Ashi, there's a middle category between the two polar extremes of the large urban centers and the small villages. You go in Matam Chasya, that's the name of the city. It's like a middle of the road star, like a Kochav Beinani. The Mafka Mikrach u'Mafka Mikfar. It's no longer in the category of a kfar because there are a lot more people, but it hasn't yet reached the status of a city because it doesn't have that many people. And in such a place, whether or not we have to go through the entire rigmarole of postponing the kvura depends upon whether he put the water onto the bus. Tanya Kavasi Rav Chizda, we now bring support to Rav Chizda that we will only be makdim the nesuin to the kvura and Shivas Yimei Mishtet, the Shivas Yimei Avelus, in event that they pour the water on the basar. Hare, here's the brayso shaya pito afuya tvilchat fal yedo vasu. Benasamayim agabi basar meis of shal chasam ibn shal kal machnitza chasam SMS lecheder esa chasam esa kal lechupa ubal bilas misu porich benoik Shivas Yimei Mishtet akach noik Shivas Yimei Mishtet Avelus. So the brayso went out of its way to add a few words. Nasan mayim al gabi basar. Now let's go back to the brayso. The brayso says v'chol osan hayomin, which means during the Yemei Mishteh, it's after kvura, but it's before the avelus. There's an isur tashmish hamita, and this has tremendous repercussions in the laws of moed with regard to someone who buried the dead on the moed. We postponed the niyug avelus till after the moed. That's when it started shiva. But during the moed himself, there's an isur called dvarim shebetzina, which means tashmish hamita. So who yoshem ben anoshim v'ishto yeshed ben anoshim. They actually have to sleep in different rooms. Why is that so? During nida, does a husband have to sleep in a different room than his wife? But here, shalo balu bila rishona, in other words, that there's a certain yitzro takva, we need to go to another extreme and separate them in two rooms. There's going to be an isur yichud who yoshem ben anoshim v'hi yishen anoshim v'ein monin tachshitim in akal kol shloshim yom. Now the brayso concludes by saying benkach ubenkach, whether it was a case of meis of shel chasan, where there's mitigating circumstances, it's an onus, they have to be makdim in a suin. Ubein even in a case where there's no onus, he got married on Yom Revi, as the takana was in the Mishnah. Lo yivol, he should not have bila rishona. Lo be'erev Shabbos, not on Leil Shabbos. Lo motzoi Shabbos. Now, Leil Shabbos is going to be what's called a chabura, because she's a basula, and that's one of the lamed tes malachos. So we have to avoid that on Shabbos. But why lo motzoi Shabbos? And the Gemara says that they made the Suda after the culmination of the chuppah with Bilas Mitzvah. And after that, they set up the Suda. Now you're going to have a Suda on Motzi Shabbos, a great banquet. And as Xerah Shem Yishchot Ben Of, he may be tempted to forget himself. He's not looking at the clock, whatever the case may be. And he'll shechta Ben Of so that there'll be fresh chicken for the Suda of Motzi Shabbos. So therefore, we should avoid the Ilas Mitzvah on Motzei Shabbos. Omar Mar, the Brisa says, Hu Yoshem Ben Anoshim, Yishen Ben Anoshim, that there's an Isur Tashrish Amita during the period of Shivas Yimei Mishnah, because Dvarim Shebetzina Noeg, Mesayel, the Rabbi Yochanan, Afki Tomer Avails B'Moed Avol Dvarim Shebetzina Noeg, that even though we postpone the Avelus until after the Moed, after the 7 days of Moed, nevertheless during the Moed, he is enjoined from Tashrish Amita, and that's called Dvarim Shebetzina. Darash Rav Yosef, Berei the Rava, Mishmei the Rava. Lo Shanu El Shlo Ba. When the Brisa says that there's an Isur Yichud and they have to sleep in separate rooms, that's the case because he has not yet been Boel his Be'ila Rishona. So he still has what's called Takfa Yitzro. Aval Baal, if it was after the Be'ila, then Ein Yitzro Takfa. And therefore there's no Isur Yichud. And Ishto Yishena Imo. And since there's no Isur Yichud, they could be in the same room and sleep in the same room. In fact, the Gemara v'hachad b'bal askina. Uktani hu yoshem ben anoshim v'yishedi ben anoshim. We're talking about a case where you already had Be'ila, because before Kvuras HaMes, we need Be'ila in order to generate the Shivas Yimei Mishnah. And now you're telling me that after Bila Rishona, there's no Isur Yichud, it's not Takaf Yitzro. And yet the Brisa says in that very scenario of Lobal Bila Rishona, that they have to sleep in different rooms, there is an Isur Yichud. And the Gemara answers, Kika Amar, that which Rav Yosef says, that after Be'ila, they're allowed to have Yichud, that refers to a person Nida, Ishta Nida. And the Brisa says that there's an Isur Yichud with his wife who's a Nida, and that Rav Yosef says that only applies if Pirsa Nida before he got a chance to be Boel. But if he was already Boel her, and then she was Pirsa Nida, then he's allowed to be Misyachid with her, because the Isur Nida is Chamur, and because of the Chumrah of an Isur Kares, he'll be very careful about it. We have no chash that his Yetzer Hara will get the best of him. And therefore we could allow them to sleep in the same room. And when the Brisa says they're not allowed to sleep in the same room, that's a case of Lo Baal Bila Rishon. So Gemara Sakashav V'chein Ktani, it says V'chein Misha Pirsa Ishton Nida, and V'chein seems to imply that it's talking about a case of Pirsa Ishton Nida that's equal to the previous case before the V'chein, which is a case where the chassid is an avel, and just like the chassan who's an avel is aser b'yichud, even though he already had be'ila, so too any person has an isur yichud with his wife who's a nida, even though he was already boel be'ila rishona, because of the word v'chein that links us back to the case earlier of the chassan avel, who is aser b'yichud even after kvar baal.